When we get 1,000 euros, well, it's going to make us a little bit happy for a short time, and then we're used to that. When we lose 1,000 euros, it's going to hurt much longer and much more intensely.
Yes, and a wonderful, wonderful, warm welcome to yet another episode of Messy and Masterful. And this is our very last episode of the year, episode 73. We are going to pause shortly our further podcasting, but not for long. We're going to be back with a vengeance in the new year. But before we go, we wanted to go out with a big bang. And we're doing so inviting back one of our guests from previous conversations on Messy and Masterful. And not just any guest, basically the guest whose episode was the most listened to episode of 2023. And that guest is Dr. Michael Vlerick, the philosopher. We interviewed him a while back on his new book, Critical and Scientific Thinking, back in the day, and another book, his first book that he had written, which is called The Second Alienation. And now Michael is back in the beginning of next year, on January 15th to be exact, with his third book, which is called Why We Are Not Happier, and as a subtitle, Happiness Despite Our Genes. And again, every time Michael is around, it makes up for such an interesting conversation. I think he's a great thinker. He's someone who really takes a deep dive and who doesn't shy away from things when they get difficult, and also makes an effort to really explain it to me and hopefully to you as our listeners. So we talk about a lot of stuff. Because we're heading into Christmas, I thought that the notion of happiness and of sharing and caring is a very important one. And that's what this episode is all about. So for our very last episode of 2023, I would like you to give a warm welcome to Dr. Michael Vlerick, the philosopher, returns. Messy and Masterful. In this podcast, we speak about the success of people who have achieved, built, or done something amazing, special, remarkable, noteworthy, and or fabulous. Think of presidents, doctors, chefs, architects, filmmakers, writers, philosophers, CEOs, journalists, and the list goes on and on of people who've had a genuine impact on this world. But rather than underlining their career victories, we speak about the challenges they needed to overcome to actually get there. In each episode, we discuss 3 of such challenges, obstacles, difficulties, and or hurdles with our guest, putting the messy of their lives next to the masterful. A very warm welcome to you. My name is Aldo Rabab, and I'm so happy you could make it. So sit back, relax, and download the podcast here. Yes, and it is a beautiful, beautiful morning here. I'm overwhelmed still with all the great responses we've received to our previous episodes. We are now close to Christmas, and Christmas is, of course, a very festive event. The holidays are coming, and holidays are important. We need to celebrate. We need to celebrate one another. We also need to celebrate happiness. And on that note, I'm very, very pleased and honored to have as our guest Dr. Michael Vlerick. Michael, very warm welcome to you.
Thank you so much, Aldo. Very happy to be here.
Michael, it's a great privilege because you are our first returning guest, which is quite an achievement, our first returning guest on Messy and Masterful. And that is with good reason, because, Michael, your interview, The Philosopher, is the most listened to interview of Messi and Masterful on Spotify of the past year. So a big congrats to that. We got our great summary or statistic summary from Spotify was sent to us, and it told us the winner of this year is The Philosopher. So yeah, let me start first with that. Like after we did our last interview, did you get a good response to it?
Yes, I did. Well, I sent it to many friends and family, and yeah, they very much enjoyed it. Was also one of my first, at least, like podcast appearances. So yes, it did make some waves in my close environments. But I'm very happy and honored to hear that it reached many more people outside of these close environments, which is wonderful to hear.
Yeah, it really was. I think a couple of things that you mentioned, and we might discuss that further down as well, is like you spoke about the echo chambers of social media, and you something you called confirmation bias. That we're very, we always need to be careful not to kind of fall into the trap of confirmation bias. That kind of where our mistakes are repeated to ourselves, preventing us to think intelligently, and that got quite a pickup on social media. We use the reel of you, ironically enough, on social media, right? So we had a reel of you basically saying these are echo chambers and be very careful. And actually, many people listened to that and basically said, wow, this is great advice and great news. So that was very much a trigger. And I think that also led to loads of people listening into the interview.
Okay, yes, I'm happy because if we can protect people against a confirmation bias, well, we're definitely enhancing human thinking for the
Yeah.
better. So, yeah.
And that is what your job is actually all about, enhancing human thinking. I like that. Michael, must be an exciting period for you, not only because of Christmas coming, but you're going to have a new book out early next year on January 15th. The book is about happiness, and it has the very triggering title, Why We Are Not Happier. And as a subtitle, Happiness Despite Our Genes. I'm going to do a very amateur attempt just to give a very short one liner on the book, and then you can shoot at it. But your claim in your new book is that basically we're almost genetically programmed to be unhappy. Is that correct?
That's a very harsh statement, but we definitely are genetically programmed to be less happy than we could be. And what is genetically programmed basically are certain psychological features, and we can obviously go into them in a second, that prevent us from being happy, despite the fact that for many of us at least, or objective life conditions are incredible. And I mean, if you compare that with people living 100 or before that, 100 years ago, well, the amount of wealth and also freedoms and possibilities that most of us are enjoying are unprecedented. And we find that happiness does rise a bit in response to these better conditions, but definitely not as much as one would hope or perhaps one would expect. And there are good evolutionary reasons for that, as I mentioned.
Take me into those reasons. Why do we want to be biologically less happy than we should be?
Well, so we've evolved two psychological characteristics that stand in the way of that happiness. The first one is that we're incredibly attuned to everything that goes wrong in our environment, that went wrong in our past, or that might go wrong in our future. They call it the negativity bias. And the evolutionary reason is simple. It was for our ancestors to survive and reproduce much more important to be aware of everything that went wrong or that could go wrong, that goes wrong, than the opportunities. Because these threats, they could end life at once. And therefore, I mean, the reproductive opportunity or the reproductive chance would have been zero, right? Opportunities and seizing opportunities were definitely important, and we've developed mechanisms for that as well, and rewarding emotions and so forth to kind of motivate us to keep pursuing these things. But they were less important than preventing threats and possible life-ending situations.
Yeah.
And therefore, as I mentioned, we have this very strong negativity bias. We're acutely aware of, and we let our imagination run wild of everything that might go wrong, right? So even if we live in a context in which we're no longer under direct threats, life-threatening situations, well, still our brain just zooms in and actually finds potential threats. That's something that everybody, to a certain extent, falls prey to.
Mhm.
It's part of human psychology, and as I said, well, we can make sense of that, or we can understand why we have that disposition when we analyze it from an evolutionary perspective.
Yeah, so I get it. So we survive because we see that if a threat is around the corner, then we need to be able to respond to it. So we are alert, and you're basically saying that alertness can diminish our happiness to a certain extent.
Yeah, and so perhaps we can kind of tie that with certain ways in which it manifests even in our modern world, right?
Mhm.
So there's a bunch of interesting expressions of that negativity bias. First of all, we're much more eager to consume negative news about the world.
Yeah,
We often say that the newspapers are filled with what goes bad and they should write more about what goes well in the world. But actually, even if they would do so, we'd probably click much more on those news items that were somehow threatening. I mean, that
yeah,
seems to be across the board, across all cultures, something that is very prevalent in human behavior. But also in our own lives. We think about the past, we ruminate about the past, we keep digging up painful memories of things that didn't go well in our past, and we keep fantasizing in a negative way about what might happen in the future. When we're lost in thought and we're thinking about the future and so forth, well, the great majority of time, that's not an enjoyable experience, and we're really focused on all these potential problems. And as most listeners will probably recognize, well, quite often we're incredibly creative in that, and meaning that we come up with disastrous scenarios that will, in all likelihood, never unfold, but still, it keeps us in the grips. And this is very much what our mind is. It's a simulation machine, right?
yeah,
It simulates possible scenarios, and therefore it prepared us for possible threats. And that is still its function today.
yeah,
But this definitely stands in the way of a carefree and happy life.
yeah. A couple of questions come to mind. One is, what is your definition for happiness? Is this like as you say, as you just ended your last observation, carefree? So, is that your definition of happiness, or is there something more elevated to it? Is there a specific terminology here that you use to measure what whether we are or whether we aren't?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And in a lot of research on happiness, we have to disentangle different aspects of it.
Hmm.
One is just your moment to moment experience, how you're feeling in that moment. Are you, I mean, in a pretty positive or, I mean, enjoyable state of mind or not? The second one, and these two can come apart quite a bit, is how satisfied you are in general with your life. So also when measuring people's happiness and in research, well, they do that in two different ways. They can ask you about how happy you are with this, with that in general, and so forth. This is life satisfaction that is being measured. Or they have another way as well to kind of gauge that. They send you, throughout the day at random intervals, kind of SMS on your phone, like a message on your phone. And on the spot, you have to say, I'm doing this. And this from 1 on 10 is, how good I feel right now. And then they find often that, well, people, these two can come apart. You can be pretty satisfied with your life upon reflection, but actually, from moment to moment happiness, well, you may be in the grips of rather negative emotions or kind of mood that is not incredibly enjoyable.
Mhm. So, what I'm trying to get towards is this moment to moment happiness. So, what I always say is like, I can be happy, when I'm eating McDonald's, right? But I know that actually it's not really good for me having a, what is it, like McChicken burger and fries and whatever unhealthy food I'm basically eating at that moment. But in that moment, I am actually still happy. Now, it's something different from my long term happiness. I think I would be, if I look back over that month, I wouldn't be so proud of that moment, of that specific moment of happiness. So it almost feels like there are two types of happiness, whereby one is as you say, looking at your life, being happy with your life, whereby you're happy that you did loads of sports, you did loads of meditation like you do, or yoga, or whatever it is. But then there's also the moment whereby you're happy doing something kind of that is a little, it's like eating candy, right? Do you make a distinction between those two in your book, and which one are you basically looking at when you say that it's difficult for us to be happy, happier, right?
Yeah, 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 very good point. And so I'm definitely looking at this long-term happiness. I like your example as well, because this is one of the ways in which our psychology works against our happiness, or again our long-term happiness, right? So you mentioned the example of binging on the McDonald's burger and enjoying that, but actually probably in the long term you're going to be guilty about having done so, and you're going to be craving pretty soon for some other stuff, and then so this is not going to contribute to your happiness. Because this is also one of the ways I mentioned there were two important psychological features that stand in the way of our happiness, these evolved psychological features. So first of all, which we've covered, the negativity bias. The second one is what is called hedonic adaptation. That means that we get used in a blink of an eye, I could say, really quickly, to good things happening to us.
Yeah.
And so you mentioned the burger. That's an interesting one, because they find that we can be incredibly craving food, food items, nice fatty food. And obviously there's also important evolutionary reasons why we really enjoy that burger, or think we're going to enjoy that burger. Fatty, calorie-rich food was very hard to come by in evolutionary times. So we needed a strong motivation to kind of, to motivate us to pursue these very important items that would have increased our chance of survival. Today, that is not the case in a world filled with McDonald's, and the same goes for sugary food and so forth. Well, artificial sugary food, obviously we know it's not life lengthening, quite the opposite, but it used to be, right? It would have guided us to ripe fruit and vitamin C and the necessary energy and so forth. So a big mismatch there. But coming back to that problem of hedonic adaptation, which is one of the major psychological features standing in the way of our happiness, and in particular standing in the way of our happiness following general progress in society, more wealth, more freedom, and so forth. That is that we get incredibly quickly used to improved situations. One part could be, again, your burger example. You're craving that McDonald's, you go into the store, mouth watering, you really want that first bite. You take that first bite, you enjoy it. Lots of dopamine is released, and then so you feel wonderful. For a bite, maybe two bites, third bite, you're already adapted to it. Fourth, fifth bite, you're probably just, downing that burger and washing it down with your Coke without giving it much extra thought, right? So pleasure is already gone, or at least radically diminished.
Yeah.
Now, this goes for a lot of the things we chase in life. Think about getting a new car or getting a promotion at work and so forth. We think we really want those things. And we do a lot to chase those things. But once we actually get it, well, we see that the reward we get for that diminishes so incredibly quickly. And what is sad and perhaps a bit worrisome is that we're generally not aware of that. So interesting research shows that we have a major bias in affective forecasting. So a major bias in assessing how long something will make us happy. Right, so we think, well, if this would happen, if I would get this new job, my dream job, I will be blissfully happy for years, perhaps the rest of my life. That is kind of what we think. We think this is what stands in the way of me and happiness. And then we get this, whatever it is, and we find that, the reward we get for that is incredibly short-lived.
Yeah.
But then we forget about that, and we're just chasing new carrots and new carrots, new carrots. And however many carrots we actually get, well, we're always craving and we're never satisfied.
Yeah. That's what you also hear a lot with advice from psychologists and psychiatrists. It's like it's somewhere in our human nature to think there's a plateau, that there's this finish line, and that once you've crossed that, you're there, right? You're not gonna have that craving anymore because it's the answer to all your dreams.
Mm.
But actually, it isn't. It's kind of there's something new happening when you're there, or something happening that you weren't aware of for people who are in that position, right? People who I always take this example. People who win the lottery, that's a very public win. So those people, after they've won the lottery, they get, a good amount of money all of a sudden. There are loads of people soliciting and calling them and asking them for, a variety of things that are absolutely, irrelevant, and kind of, so they're overwhelmed by
Mm.
all, loads of people all of a sudden knocking on their doors, which you're not aware of, before you win the lottery. You just want to win the lottery, right? And you think you can handle it. But I've read with some people that said, like, I wish I wouldn't have won, because
Yeah.
I really don't want to be dealing with all these people asking me for things that, it's very tiresome, right? I'm just using that as an example, as a kind of a nasty side effect
Mm.
of when you've seemingly crossed that finish line that isn't there effectively.
Yeah, that's so interesting you mentioned that example, because that was one of the most, I would say, eye-catching research that has been done on hedonic adaptation. I think it's
Yeah,
been done the first time like almost half a century ago, so it's quite an old study, been replicated in different kind of contexts. And what they did is they put the theory of hedonic adaptation to a pretty extreme test, and they looked and compared at people who just won the lottery and people who just got into an accident, leaving them paraplegic.
yeah,
So, I mean, the most lucky scenario on the one hand,
yeah, and
and the most unlucky scenario, or one of the most unlucky scenarios on the other hand, you
yeah,
think. And I wanted to see how, I mean, their happiness levels would evolve. As you can imagine, when, I mean, just, when people won the lottery, they're over the moon, they're excited, this is an incredible luck, and they spend money on whatever they wanted and they could never afford. And so for first few weeks, well, they're flying, let's say. And obviously, the people who got into the accident, well, major life crisis. No, I mean, they have to adapt to living in a wheelchair and so forth. So tough, tough, tough. But only 5 months afterwards, 5 or 6 months afterwards, both actually got nearly back to where they started before they had won or before they got into the accident. Right, so they
oh,
got completely adapted to their situation. And
yeah,
that's why I also wanted to tell you this example. This also shows the silver lining of hedonic adaptation. It also works in the other way, right? If bad things happen to us and leaving us, I mean, in this extreme case, like permanently handicapped, well, we also adapt to that and we make the most of it. And there's even an interesting effect then, because when you won the lottery and you're back to square one in terms of happiness, that actually kind of often leaves you dipping under your previous level of happiness, because now you're incredibly disappointed with the fact that this didn't deliver the goods for long, right? And then you
oh,
also mention, well, people make lots of demands of you, and so this can make it troubling. But more generally, we find that people have a feeling like, "Well, I got everything I wanted and I still feel so bad," and this makes it kind of worse, right? So,
yeah,
and slightly, I mean, gives them a feeling of despair even. Whereas the people who went through major tragedy, like being paraplegic for life, well, they are amazed at their psychological resilience, and they come away often with a sense of self worth out of that experience. They often call it post traumatic growth as well,
yeah,
which is also an interesting phenomenon that kind of shows this. So,
yeah.
yeah.
I like what you say about hedonistic adaptation. It doesn't seem to instill any resilience, right? It doesn't kind of nurture any kind of skills that we can use further down. And it reminds me a little bit of entitlement. So when you look, we're all afraid that we are entitled, but maybe in some levels we are, right? And I think being entitled is not kind of a skill that you could use for anything other than frustrating yourself and just coming across as someone very spoiled kind of to others. It sounds a lot like that. Or is there anything that we could, as human beings, we could learn from our hedonistic adaptation?
Yeah, well, as you mentioned, well, first of all, it's on the side of being rewarded with catching these carrots and not being rewarded for very long.
Yeah,
So in the negative way of hedonic adaptation,
hedonic.
well, it's actually obviously a major drain or a major obstacle to happiness because on the one hand, I mean, the reward is taken away from us and we're back at square one. But even more so, it constantly keeps us craving for more. That's why we find new carrots, and that's why, however much we achieve in life, accomplish, get these carrots, this is never going to end. And
Mm,
it's very important to be aware of that. And this is where the lessons will come in, and we might go into that in a second. But you also mentioned this entitlement. I would call it a vulnerability to loss as well, right?
mm,
So if you have lots of wealth and so forth, and like objective great circumstances, that makes you very vulnerable to losing some of that. And we know that when we gain something new, when we get more money, and this is also one of the ways the negativity bias I talked about works, when we, get, let's say, let's just put a simple sum on it, when we get 1,000 euros, well, it's going to make us a little bit happy for a short time, and then we're used to that. When we lose 1,000 euros, it's going to hurt much longer and much more intensely, right?
mm,
So unequal psychological impact there. Losses hurt more than gains. Similar
yeah,
gains actually benefit us. They call it loss aversion. Uh, right. And so this kind of entitlement that you mentioned kind of follows from that, right? So we're so vulnerable with all of our good conditions because something is being taken for us. We know that it hurts for a very long time and much more than, I mean, it would actually please us if we get something on the upside.
yeah. Let's go back to the very beginning, Michael. Why did you want to write this book?
Hmm. Yeah, good question. I think we kind of discussed it a little bit at the end of our last interview, where I talked about meditating and so forth, and being very interested in the research coming out of positive psychology, the branch of psychology that is concerned with how we can become happier, not just how we can be psychologically quote unquote healthy or neurotypical, but actually how we can increase that happiness. And so I was practicing with all of that, but obviously I was also interested in it from a research point of view. And in my research, and I also mentioned this in the previous episode, in my research I tried to apply evolutionary theory to important problems such as knowledge, but also society and global cooperation and so forth. And then I thought, like, well, we should really start thinking about happiness and about psychology a bit in general from this evolutionary point of view. And I think it sheds a very interesting light on some of the important psychological features. So it gives us a new and interesting insight into our psychology. And it kind of connects with lots of the research that has been done on the human psyche and
Yeah,
on well-being, on happiness, on hedonic adaptation, on the negativity bias, and so forth.
yeah. What I like about where it very much fits with the yeah your first book, the second alienation, de tweede vervreemding in Dutch, is indeed these global occurrences, right? So there's you started with our happiness is affected by the negative news we see in the media. And even though there's no direct impact kind of in our daily lives of what we see, and unfortunately, we're talking to each other at a time whereby there's loads of conflict in the world. We have the situation in Israel and Gaza, and we have the situation in the Ukraine. I was at a conference just a few weeks back, and the tone was many people were very worried and unhappy from all over the world, also people that were not impacted by this conflict directly. So so my question is, with this global way of talking about things, whatever is happening in the world, do we then also get a global decrease of our happiness levels? Is it then, because we consume the media very similar across the board, and as you also said, like, we have a bigger tendency to go for the negative news than to go for the positive news?
There's been a lot of research on that, and I would say happiness has definitely not decreased on a global level. It has slightly increased over the last 100 years, since, I mean, or let's say 50, 60 years, since people
Mm.
started measuring that, and then since there's any kind of scientific insight into world happiness. So it does increase, but it increases so little compared to the obvious massive increases again in wealth, in freedom for most people, in living conditions. We have to remember that at the beginning of the 20th century, more than 90% or around 90% of people lived in extreme poverty. That is,
Mm.
living on what today would be less than €1 a day, and makes you vulnerable for starvation whenever there's
Yeah.
crop failure and so forth. And so obviously also many other aspects of those times, or conditions of those times, would be completely, I mean, abhorrent to us today. I mean, most people buried at least one of their children who would have died at a very young age,
Mm.
several children probably. Also lived in a context in which there was no freedom. I mean, and was much oppression and so forth. Conflict was rampant. We're talking about these two very sad military conflicts that we have today. But if you look at this from a historical perspective, well, the conflict we see today on a world scale is just a fraction of what it used to be,
Yeah.
uh, and so
But
forth. So yes,
but that's the thing. We weren't aware. So if you lived in the UK like I do, there might have been a conflict in Belgium, but we didn't have media or newspapers or whatever. So not knowing might have made me happier. You're right. I would have had, I would have had less to my availability, uh,
yeah.
but psychologically, I wouldn't be impacted by it.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
We're talking. I mean, I was starting to answer two different questions.
Oh,
So,
sorry.
well, to that one question,
Yeah.
there is good research that at least for many people, consuming the media does not contribute to more happiness. Quite the
Yeah.
opposite, often, right?
Yeah.
So, the thing you mentioned, and then constantly being bombarded with these world problems and so forth, it does weigh on people.
Yeah.
So that's definitely one. Now, by then saying that, like, global happiness has decreased is a bridge too far, because there's been there's a global happiness report and so forth, and it does generally show some increases as conditions have become much better for most people globally, and so there is some increase, but it's incredible how slight that increase in happiness is compared again to the increases in wealth, comfort,
Yeah.
and so forth, and yeah.
Yeah. No, I think it's fascinating, and it shows effectively that there's a little bit of a disconnect between what's actually available, what's actually there, and us, as you say, like with your burger allegory, that you can, with bite one you're excited, with bite four you think it's normal. That we adapt so quickly to it. There's this book by an economist. It escapes me now. I'll tell you later what the title of the book is, but it says exactly as what you are saying. It basically looks at the life of Louis XIV, the Emperor of France, in his position, having such wealth, having all this tremendous luxury available to him. And if you factually look at all the luxury that is available to him, that's available to everyone today, right? So it's kind of, we emulated that step by step by step by step. We even have more luxury available as very normal people who don't have such lavish life or have such enormous wealth, but we don't realize it, right? Because if we were to compare notes, we would realize it, but not many of us do.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Perhaps not luxury as such, but our living conditions of even, like the average, wealth speaking, then, I mean, averagely wealthy person today on our planet is much better than Louis XIV's
yeah,
situation. I mean,
yeah,
imagine we have a headache. Well, we take an aspirin. I mean, that wasn't available there for Louis XIV, but imagine
yeah,
something worse with our health. Obviously, we have all of these, that medicine that he couldn't count on. We can travel to another continent in a matter of hours. I mean, the world has become such an amazingly interesting place with access to information that was obviously not in the cards for people then, even the richest among those people, and so forth. So
yeah,
many ways, our lives have improved radically.
yeah,
And in the book, I kind of have this thought experiment in which I think, like, I mean, what would the dream be of our ancestor, our distant hunter-gatherer ancestors, right? If you'd ask them, like, what would your pure utopia be, like the best possible world you can imagine? Well, obviously, I cannot know, I cannot enter into their head, but I probably might answer something like, well, a world in which we're never hungry, a world
Yeah.
in which we don't have to fear for our lives because other tribes are there attacking us, a world in which we don't have to bury our children. Well, and that would seem a world of pure affluence and absurdly, I mean, great circumstances for them. And then they probably would laugh it away straight away as an impossibility for
Mm,
life, right? Because it's
mm,
so far removed from what they have. Well, if we look at most of our lives today, not only did that dream come true, it actually exceeded because they couldn't never have predicted all of the other perks that come with, modern life.
yeah.
So we absolutely live their dream lives. But what they would have completely underestimated, or they wouldn't have even considered probably, is that these brains we've evolved, well, when everything is going so well, they quickly get adapted to that, and then they just focus and zoom in on problems, and their quality of life, or at least the experience of life, is not so fundamentally different from theirs. Our problems have
Yeah.
just become first world problems, but they still have us in our grips, and we still suffer the emotional
Yeah.
consequences.
A couple of questions come to mind because we can talk for hours. And before we click the record button, and I'm very proud and happy to announce that here, is we're going to do more episodes on this beautiful book you've written, right? So, because I think the world deserves to know more about your writing, about this great book. I also feel it's a way to help people to become happier. That's one of the objectives of the Messy and Masterful podcast. So we're going to do more episodes taking the book in parts. It will be published on January 15th, and then we're going to do several interviews around specific parts in the book. So I want all our listeners to know that we're very excited about that specific series on happiness with Dr. Michael Vlerick. One of the things that I, of course, wonder is everything you're saying kind of begs for some life advice. So it's kind of, I know you're an observer, you're a philosopher, you just kind of see it as it is. But are there any takeaways for the readers on how to exercise happiness? If we know what's going on, how can we then harness ourselves against that unhappiness and can really let our happiness levels flourish the way they should do?
Yes, thank you, Aldo. I was hoping we'd get to that part, and that is why I wrote the book as well. If my story would have ended here, like, okay, we've evolved these psychological characteristics, they stand in the way of our happiness, well, it would be a pretty depressing story, a pretty depressing book, and it is everything but, right? I think
Mm,
almost half of the book is devoted to actually pointing out how we can increase our happiness, and we can make massive changes to our life experience. So the research shows this, but it has been known for quite a long time that with the proper insights and practices, we can kind of undo these obstacles to happiness, and a deep and kind of permanent happiness, which doesn't mean permanent bliss or joyful excitement or something, quite to the contrary, but a kind of deeply happy life is definitely in the cards for us. And so, yes, I'm very happy to get into that because I think it's incredibly important, and it kind of follows from what I've said up till now. And so, in order to permanently increase our happiness, to kind of raise our baseline of happiness to which we always return after something good happens, as I said with the lotto winners, the lottery winners, well, they went back to their baseline happiness. When something bad happens, they also kind of come back to the baseline happiness. But so we seem to be kind of stuck on baseline happiness, more or less, for our lives. And so, in order to really increase that baseline happiness, well, the first thing we must do, and this is the key message of the book, is we must be aware of these psychological features, and therefore we must be aware that this next stick, this next punishing emotion in the form of fantasizing about what goes wrong and then what went wrong and so forth, and then the negative, bodily sensation of that emotion, that stick is just something very ephemeral, something very
Mm.
transitory. Well, if we do not feed it, if we do not feed that negative emotion by ruminating on it, by being imprisoned by these thoughts, well, we can let it go quite easily. And this has, and most of you, this might ring a bell, and that this is precisely what practices like Buddhist meditation and other forms of meditation try to do, right? So kind of get out of that ruminating mind, and therefore allow these negative emotions to dispel. So that is one thing, right? So in order to deal with negative emotions, what we need to do is incredibly simple. We need to observe those emotions and not react. And with reacting, I
Mm.
don't mean only physical behavioral reactions, but also no mental reactions,
Yeah.
meaning alarming thoughts about whatever it is that triggered these emotions. So if we learn to just observe that, well, that negative emotion will vanish incredibly soon. Actually, research in neurology has shown that the shelf life of an emotion, if not fed by, again, alarming thoughts, is no longer than 90 seconds. So
Yeah.
no longer than 90 seconds should you feel the effects of your cortisol and adrenaline rising because you've thought about some alarming scenario in the future. Well, if you let it go, it will you will be free instantaneously almost.
Yeah.
So that is one thing. The other thing on the other side is that constant craving for more and new things and believing that you will be happy when and if, and this never arrives. We get these things and so forth, that hedonic adaptation, as we said, that kind of makes us used to whatever improvements we get. We also should be very aware of that, and we should train our brain to kind of be content with what we have. And there's a bunch of exercise for that. One in particular has been studied a lot and shows great promise, and it is focusing on good things in your life. And this kind of also deals with the negativity bias. So we're so wired to always think about the bad things and not so much about the good things. We take those for granted, right? So in order to reprogram our brain, well, we must, consciously make an effort daily, for instance, to think about what went well today, what you're grateful for. And perhaps the last thing I can say on this, the Stoics, the Greek Stoics have a great practice for this, and they used to practice this a lot, and they call it negative visualization. And it may sound a bit weird to our Western or modern Western, because we're also Western, obviously, to our modern ears. Well, what they did is they visualized, catastrophic events in their lives. They called it as well premeditatio malorum, so premeditate on everything that can go really wrong. Well, you think, well, what is the difference with what we do spontaneously? Well, what they did is, for instance, they visualized that one of their children or loved ones would come to die and then be awfully sick and so forth. But then immediately afterwards, they kind of cultivated this feeling of immense gratitude for the fact that this actually is not happening now.
Yeah.
It is not the case. One of your kids is not dying now. And so you also imagine then that if this were the case, if one of your kids would actually be very sick, well, that you would give everything, anything you'd have in order to be in your exact situation as you are now. And so you keep coming to the insight that you should be so amazingly happy for your life exactly as it is now. And this can be an incredibly powerful practice. By doing this, and obviously it's a practice, you need to do it regularly, make a habit out of it. Well, you kind of make your mind, which by nature is Velcro for everything that is negative, to Velcro for everything that is positive. You tune your mind to the good things, and then
Yeah.
you can really change your day-to-day and life experience with these
It
practices.
sounds like there's a lot of knowing yourself in there, because when you started with saying like you need to observe the emotion but not react to it, the only way to observe it is knowing that it is an emotion, right? So this is also with entitled behavior, something that is applied in pedagogy, whereby if you see an entitled child in a toy shop, right? So a child wants a toy and the parent says, no, you cannot have that toy. And then it escalates. The child gets a tantrum because he or she cannot have the toy. What actually is going on is that the child experiences an emotion that he or she does not yet have the words for, right? It's the emotion of maybe craving, wanting it. It's the emotion of potentially being jealous because another child got it. So what psychologists kind of advise is help navigate the child through learning which emotion is at play here. If they can recognize the emotion, like, I really want this, I desire this, or I'm jealous because someone else had it, then the temperature already kind of lowers, right? It already becomes a lot more digestible, and the entitled behavior will disappear. But what is a rule for this to work is, of course, us having the ability to recognize which emotion is at play here, right? That is one thing that, of course, for children, for your young daughters as well as for mine, might be difficult because they just need to learn.
Yeah, and for us all, I would say, I
For
think
us all,
there's
yeah.
two key skills we need to develop there. And one is, generally mindfulness. Quite often we're in the grip of emotions without consciously knowing that we're in the grip of those emotions, and we're just
Yeah.
reacting.
Yeah,
So we don't even stop, right?
yeah,
A second one is, and this is also cultivated in forms of meditation, is to not identify with these emotions. And,
yeah,
and we do that all the time. And also our language shows this, right? You say, I am angry, right?
yeah,
I am sad. It's part of me, right? This is
yeah,
who I am at this moment,
yeah,
right? But actually, it is just a very fleeting appearance in consciousness, right? When we look outside of the window, we see a tree. We're not saying, I am this tree. No, we know. There's just this visual impression of that tree when we look at it, right?
yeah,
It should be, and we should train our brain to kind of have the same kind of view on whatever goes on internally, right?
yeah,
I'm not what I'm thinking. These are thoughts appearing, and some make sense. Some are really not helpful. Some are not true. Some are true. Some emotions are enjoyable. Some are not. And when we view them as external elements that just arise and pass away in consciousness very quickly, well, we kind of free ourselves of them, right? If we
yeah,
enjoy the emotion, we can enjoy them to the fullest without craving and hanging on to them.
yeah,
If they're not enjoyable at all, we just allow them to pass through, as they always do, really quickly, if we're not constantly feeding into them with,
yeah,
more of these thoughts. But again, this takes training, right? It takes the
yeah,
insight first, but then it takes training, because spontaneously, this is exactly what we'll do. We'll react, we'll have a strong mental reaction and so forth, and therefore will unnecessarily lengthen our emotional pain
yeah,
for hours, days,
yeah,
perhaps a lifetime sometimes,
yeah,
right? Certain kind of emotions that never leave us.
yeah. One of the things I basically have two questions, and I'm sure new questions will arise. So I'm very happy we're going to have more interviews to kind of take a real deep dive here. But one of the things that strike me is we need a carrot, as a next carrot, as human beings, almost, right? Because that has enabled us to grow and to progress and to build the societies that we've built, right? And that has given us this level of welfare. So if we were to completely take away our craving for the next and the next and the next thing, you could argue we're almost no longer a human being.
And it would not be perhaps desirable for society. I also gather
Yes.
your question, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's important to focus on the craving aspect, right? It's often called equanimity, right? Not being in the grips of craving, but also aversion to negative stuff, and then kind of being okay and let it arise and pass away without these painful emotions, right? So I would say we don't need craving for us to act in a beneficial way and to have something to do and to have projects that make us happy and give us life satisfaction. So none of that would go away, right? The only thing that would go away is the fact that we would be constantly dissatisfied with our current situation. Also, I think it would even lead to better motivations for actions, right? Quite often, this craving for instance, more money or more status, is really something that is very self-involved and so forth. If we let these things go, well, we open up to perhaps motivations that would benefit the world more, like desire to help others in need, to make the world a better place, to
Well,
develop something nice, something interesting that others can benefit from, and so forth. It becomes more other regarding.
yeah, but let me stop you there, Michael, because that is also a craving, but it's a collective craving, right? As you also address in the second alienation, it's like if we want to progress as a society, the example you gave of like, I want to, no more child mortality. I don't want to see my child dying. So many of those things. The craving for progress doesn't have to be purely selfish. It could be a collective craving of a village, city, country, multiple countries to do something together. It's not only craving in the negative. It could be a desire and ambition to change something. Is that not built on the same principle, or does that come from something else?
Yeah, that's very good to start disentangling things
Yeah.
there, right? So I wouldn't call that craving.
Mm.
Craving, I would call that like a real feeling of lack and of needing something for yourself in your own life. It's very self-involved, typically
Mm.
craving. The desire to help others has actually been shown that just feeling that desire actually really contributes to happiness and to the feeling of living a meaningful life, right?
Mm.
Even compassion, and then like these meditating monks that Buddhist monks that really meditate on loving kindness, compassion, on these types of emotions. So really feeling for the suffering of other people, and having a desire, strong desire to do something about that, and living a life of altruism and so forth. Well, if they find that this actually, I mean, first of all, interestingly, when they put them on their brain scanners, they find that is there's activity in very different regions of the brain than, for instance, when somebody is craving something, some more status, some more money, certain goods and so forth. So there's something very different on a neurological level going on, and they also report great happiness through that. And this nicely brings me to that third point. So I said, like, in order to lead a happy life, and I think it's good to kind of put them out there, right? So we've already covered this kind of equanimity, and not being, these painful emotional reactions that keep us suffering for such a long time. That this is a very, very important point. The second one, which we've also covered, is developing gratitude and contentment for what we have, and not always craving for more and being dissatisfied with our life as it is. Again, not saying that we shouldn't do anything in the world, quite to the contrary. And this is the third point, or the third major pillar of happiness, and it is somehow investing in your personal relationships, so the interconnectedness, but more largely living a life dedicated to the benefit of others. Right, so they find, and there's so many interesting studies on altruism, and then people living altruistic lives, sometimes extreme altruism, are also people generally that are incredibly, incredibly happy. One of the longest studies on happiness actually revealed this one thing. So there was a study that was started in after the Second World War at Harvard in the US, and they followed a bunch of students, but also people in the town nearby, throughout their lives, and looked at a bunch of things. How happy they were, how healthy they were, how long they lived, and they found that the biggest predictor of all these three things, happiness, longevity, and general health, well, was the quality of their relationships. Right, so we're social beings, and this is the only carrot that we should be chasing. Right, it's not one of those fake carrots that once you eat them, well, their effect completely wanes in a matter of seconds, and you're back there craving. Right, this is something that keeps nurturing you. And so a happy life is very much a life, you live in close proximity to others with nourishing, close personal relationships, but also a life that is to a certain extent dedicated to the benefit of others. And I think that's perhaps the most beautiful thing that comes out of the research on happiness, that is that the more you help others being happy, the more happy you will be yourself.
So I have now an automatic question. I almost don't dare to ask it because that's another book, maybe. Why is that? Like, because there is, first of all, I think there is a selfish motivation there of people who help others, because even if it is that you feel good about it, that's okay, right? There's no judgment there. It's good that you feel good about helping others. You should. But
exactly. Yeah, I hear two interesting questions there. First of all, is actually altruism in the literal sense of the word, is that even possible, right?
yeah,
Because if you feel good for yourself by helping somebody else, well, in a way you're doing it for those good feelings, right? And so sure, good point, and definitely this is perhaps the case, right? So that's why in a lot of research on altruism, at least from an evolutionary point of view, they focus on biological altruism, which is helping another organism at the expense of yourself often. But if
Mm.
that makes you feel good by sharing food, in times of scarcity and so forth, well, that's why you're doing it. So definitely. But perhaps the more broader why question about that, why is it that helping other people and nurturing close relationships makes us happy? Of course, we need to go through the evolutionary logic of that, right? So we're social beings. We've always lived in groups. And as I mentioned in the previous broadcast, we're incredible cooperators, altruistic cooperators, even with non-kin. And there's an evolutionary reason for all of that. But so importantly, the people that were more, or ancestors that were more disposed, to have good ties, close ties with other people within that group and help these people, those were the people who were better off. Those were the people who, got lots of reciprocating behavior from others in the group. And so we're able to profit from that. And so we're very much their descendants. And so for the typical humans today, well, nurturing these relationships is something that is giving us happiness. But interestingly, there's no adaptation to that happiness, right? So
Yeah,
a good interaction with a close friend at age 50 is as good as it was as age 20 or 10,
yeah,
right? So we don't get
yeah,
used to that. Whereas, for instance, all of these, and also perhaps we shouldn't go into that here, but we could. There's different kind of happiness hormones and neurotransmitters involved, right? But so the
yeah,
typical craving behavior, which is a kind of dopamine, I want this kind of craving, well, we get adapted to that so incredibly quickly. Whereas those ties, those close connections, oxytocin and so forth, different kind of hormones, serotonin is being produced as well. They give us much more lasting happiness.
yeah. I like what you said. It sounds like there's no hedonic adaptation when we're genuinely altruistic,
Exactly.
and so that's why you can give and give and give and give again.
And it
You
keeps feeling as
and
good.
it keeps being fulfilling. It's not like the fourth bite of the hamburger
Exactly.
we described. It keeps on giving on the same level. That's a very interesting notion. I have one more question about today's world, and again, the use of social media, because what you said about altruism, I think social media has evolved from just consuming content to also people now feeling they need to rise and stand up and do something or say something to respond, to show that they care. And there was this podcast with Trevor Noah, also big comedian, South African comedian, very famous in the United States. He doesn't need any introduction, but he basically said that's also a dangerous notion, because if everyone starts talking like they're the head of state, could be around a conflict or could be around anything else, then you get so many opinions, but also these opinions confuse you because you're also going to bump into people on these platforms that have a different opinion. So now this notion does come from, I would say, the impulse to respond or to say something comes from a sentiment to do something good. However, the way our communication channels work, it might backfire to a certain extent, and it ends up in becoming a very polarized situation, right? Which we see a lot of when looking at politics or so many other scenarios. Basically, you get only two opinions at a certain point. It might be a very complicated question, but have you kind of taken that into consideration when you look at happiness, on how social media affects happiness and how we deal with it?
Yeah, so I've definitely looked at that. In the book, there's a chapter as well about how our psychology leads to certain problems in the modern world. And just very briefly and quickly, one is a chronic stress response, right? So we have, the stress response for imminent danger. Actually, what happens is, the blood flows to our muscles and so forth. So we're ready to do a physical, very strong physical reaction, running, fighting, fight or flight, they often call it, and so forth. So that's all good, but that doesn't help you one bit if you have a deadline at work, right? And you're typing away at your laptop.
Yeah.
Obviously, that doesn't help you at all, but it
Yeah.
also is really bad for your health. So the stress response is not that acute; it's much
Yeah.
more low level, but it's much more chronic, right? And
Yeah.
it's really a problem as well for your well-being. So stress is a major problem, and it's a completely maladaptive response in most of the modern, in the modern context, at least for most of the modern problems we deal with,
Yeah.
for which it is triggered. The second one, and kind of relates to what we said before this question, the importance of relationships is loneliness. More and more people are becoming socially isolated. Again, this is a very sad occurrence because we need other people to be happy, to be lastingly happy. And I think statistics show that almost 1 in 3 adults today suffer from loneliness.
One in three.
Major
Oh.
problem even for their health. I mean, lonely
Yeah.
people do not live as long. They have a chronic stress response because of the loneliness as well,
Mm.
but also for their well-being. And then a third one is all these what I call artificial carrots, right? We've talked about all of these carrots. Well, we found a lot of ways in our modern environment to kind of give us, a dopamine hit. And a dopamine hit, I mean, this is something we are wired to pursue, right? Think about alcohol and some other drugs, but also think about things like social media. They can be incredibly, incredibly addictive. And that is precisely because they interact with that dopamine system in our brains. And so they find that people, especially young people who spend a lot of time on social media, well, they come away on the one hand with less self-esteem, which is obviously already problematic because of the whole social comparison thing and everybody putting, a dream life online and not the reality. And so people feel like, wow, I mean, my life is not nearly as nice as their lives. But also generally, right? So it constantly gives you this artificial little boost of dopamine, and this kind of leads to the problem. This goes for all of these artificial dopamine enhancers like alcohol and drugs and so forth. Some drugs, not all drugs. But anyways, that kind of actually leads to the fact that in life, well, that dopamine system is over triggered, and therefore you get less dopamine production throughout your days,
Yeah.
making you feel more listless and less joyful and so forth. So there's a lot to be careful there, and social media seems to negatively contribute to happiness, therefore, at
Yeah.
least when consumed in excessive manner.
So basically, it's best to reject social media in its entirety or to consume in moderation, or any takeaways there? You don't have to. I mean, you're
Well,
not.
I think it's important. I think
Yeah.
the takeaway is to use it wisely because it has the
Yeah.
potential actually to do something that is great for happiness. Connect
Yeah.
with people, and
Yeah.
I use it to contact friends. I mean that I otherwise, I mean that I won't see because they live far away and so forth, and then to keep tracking what's happening with them and so forth. And all of this is so important for happiness. So when used wisely, it could be a great contributor to happiness. But
Yeah.
when used unwisely and just keeping on scrolling and scrolling and scrolling out of boredom, and that we find that, well, this is actually definitely negatively contributing
Yeah.
to happiness. So
Yeah.
use them wisely.
Yeah.
That would be the conclusion.
Use it wisely. Let's not give in to hedonic adaptation. Let's be more altruistic. So many wisdoms that you've shared, Michael, and I thank you for it. Your book, Why We Are Not Happier, Happiness Despite Our Genes, will be published January 15th by Lano, a Belgian publishing house. It will be available on the big book retail sites, and we'll be sure to include those links into our show notes. Unfortunately, it will first be published in Dutch, so it's a Dutch edition. But we always encourage people who are listening in, if you're interested in the English version, then connect us to publish the English version. Then connect with us, so maybe we can then introduce you to Michael's team and see what can be done naturally. And then, of course, I'm very excited that we're going to do more conversations around this wonderful book in the new year, whereby we're going to dive into the many topics we have discussed just now in more detail to ensure that you as listeners can become happier as well. So, Michael, thank you so much for being our guest, being our very last guest of 2023. Being our most listened to guest of 2023. We wish you all the best with all the beautiful things that is to come. Thanks so much, Dr. Michael Vlerick.
Thank you so much, Aldo, and I really look forward to delving into this series and more into detail with you in the coming year.
If you liked this episode, then it would mean the absolute world if you could share it with your friends and or give it a short review on your preferred podcast platform. The more you share your ideas about these interviews, the more people will find out about them. So do let us know what you think. We'd be very, very grateful.
Special thanks to Philip Anderson for our beautiful theme music. This episode was edited by Natalie Piles with production assistance from Genta Metalia.